That's my wife, Katy.
And that's my husband, Josh.
And this is Book Club Day. Thank you very much for joining us. This is episode 3. This is part 3 of 4 of our book club of Lessons in Chemistry by Bonnie Garmus, displayed behind us here ever so nicely. It's the pink book if you missed it. So obviously, we're going to get into it, our most current reading on it. But before we do that, Katy, I suspect not much has changed, but I have to ask, what else are you reading?
Not much.
Not much. Still that Witch Tea series?
Yeah, the Sweet Tea Witch series.
Sweet Tea Witch series.
Just kind of cranking through that series, but I'm enjoying it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's okay.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's good. I'm still reading The Sword of Kaigan.
Mm-hmm.
I suspect I'll finish probably in the next week or so. Man, some things went down.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh. So, I think I will do probably like an individual video on that.
Like a solo review?
Yeah, like a solo review, spoiler free, of course, and maybe one with spoilers because I just want to talk about it. But we'll see. Let me know down in the comments if you'd be interested in something like that.
Anything else? We've watched a few movies.
We have watched a few movies.
You're kind of on holiday break at the moment.
I am, which is nice.
It is nice.
So, yeah, it's all good. It's all good. All right, well, let's just get into it. So, again, this is part 3 of 4. Katy.
Yeah.
Give us a brief synopsis of what this book's about for the people who may be tuning in for the first time.
And if you're tuning in for the third time, I'm sorry if this sounds repetitive. But it is it is the 1950s, and Elizabeth Zott dreams of being a scientist, which is challenged by a society that says women belong in the domestic sphere rather than in the lab. She accepts a job on a cooking show for TV and then sets out to teach a nation of housewives way more than just recipes.
Oh, boy. Ooh. Okay. All right. So this is your spoiler and speculation warning. We're going to be talking about, of course, this book. We're going to be speculating on it, and we will be discussing in depth anything between the chapters of 1 through
32.
32? Is it 32? Okay, chapters 1 through 32 is what we'll be discussing, and we'll also be speculating, so you've been warned.
Yeah.
And then the next episode of Book Club, that will be part 4 of 4 of this, and that will be the last.
Yeah, the last
one.
Quarter of the book,
yeah,
basically.
So, again, we read about 25% every week. We come back here, we discuss what we've read. Kate and I have not had any previous discussions, so...
Yeah, and I think for this book, it's worked out well, because it's about 100 pages, it's about 100 pages.
Yeah.
Per quarter.
Yeah, it's a good
book. So I think with shorter books, we might end up not having quite as many parts.
Right. Well, I mean, frankly, it's we're this is long form, so I'll just get into it. This is our first kind of pilot series, if you will, and so Kate and I are trying to figure out the best kind of format, the best way to do this. Yeah. Also trying to balance our lives. Some books we could absolutely read in a week. I think this is one that we could have, but other books, it's not as feasible, right?
Yeah.
So.
But this also allows for a little bit of a more in-depth.
It does.
Discussion.
It does. So, yeah, this kind of show, Book Club Day.
It kind of depends on the book.
Yeah, it does. It does. So, hopefully we formatted it well. If you have any thoughts or anything, this is episode 3, feel free to let us know if you think maybe we should approach it this way or that way, or maybe we should talk about this first or that first, whatever.
As far as like formatting goes.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you have any suggestions of books you'd like to see us read and discuss, let us know.
100%. We're always up for hearing about new books that we haven't heard of or read before. Okay, so we're going to do a quick recap of what was read in the first 2 readings. So, Katy.
So, for chapters 1 through 11, which is our first episode, and we'll have all the episodes linked below. That way you can go back and take a listen if you would like to kind of join us along the ride of the whole book. But our abbreviated version, our first portion of the book in chapters 1 through 11, we were introduced to our main characters of Elizabeth Zott and Calvin Evans. And they're both chemists that work at a research facility, though their experiences there are drastically different. They end up entering into a relationship, and romance blooms. Their love grows. We get to see that relationship take off. And off the bat, we're aware that Elizabeth is constantly having to overcome obstacles, both professionally and socially. And primarily it is just because she is a woman and because her goals and aims in life are outside of the norm, especially for that time period. They adopt a dog that they name 630, who's adorable. And as Elizabeth and Calvin are hitting their stride in their relationship, Calvin unexpectedly dies when he slips on an oil spill while jogging and then is run over by a police car.
Okay.
Yeah. So Josh is going to give us the next portion.
I'm going to give us the next portion. This was from our second episode. This would
below.
Also linked below. This will cover chapters 12 through 23. So the fallout from Calvin's untimely death is that Elizabeth is effectively a widow. They weren't married or anything, but for all intents and purposes, she's mourning him. However, he leaves her a gift, maybe an unwelcome one from Elizabeth's perspective, depending on the day. It was that she's pregnant, so she's carrying she's carrying their baby. And because they weren't married, and because Calvin is no longer there to protect her at the research facility that they were both working at, Elizabeth is fired. That was basically just socially taboo back then. And I think this is like 50s, 60s. So basically they just dismissed her and there was no recourse. And so she kind of is just trying to make her own way. And the way she does that is she attempts to make ends meet by unofficially consulting with her former coworkers, because a lot of her former coworkers very quickly realize that they need Elizabeth. So she takes no credit for any of the work, but she charges them basically cash only for just consulting on science projects. So pretty cool if every other thing wasn't hitting her upside the head at the moment, but right?
Right. It's a lot all at once to do.
It is. And she's just trying to make ends meet. So she builds a lab in her kitchen so she can continue her work on abagenesis as well as other things, it seems. It seems like she just likes to tinker in general and experiment. So
yeah,
she builds a lab in her kitchen. She finds that probably more useful. 630, their dog, is almost killed by a groundskeeper, which gets your heart pumping, that chapter does. But he doesn't, so don't worry. Elizabeth has the baby. She names the baby Mad Zot because she's mad at Calvin. But she doesn't really get around to ever changing her name, so she just calls her Madeline. Roughly a year later, when Mad is about a year, Dr. Mason, who was her, what's that type of doctor called?
OBGYN.
An OBGYN. Her OBGYN swings by and tries to get her to come back to rowing, water rowing. And then Harriet Sloane, her neighbor, becomes an unofficial member of the household and effectively becomes a pseudo-aunt grandmother figure for Mad and kind of like an older sister to Elizabeth. Elizabeth, she does get her job back at Hastings, but then her work is stolen by her boss, and so she quits, justifiably so. And then we end with Walter Pine, the TV producer from the very beginning of this whole book, calling Elizabeth and saying, hey, I want you to be the host of a cooking show. And it pays better than any opportunity she's had in the recent past. So that's where we kind of left off and where we got into our weekly chapter reading, which was chapters 24 through 32.
Yeah.
So, honey, yeah, let's just kind of just talk through what we read.
It. Yeah. So I enjoyed this portion. I thought it was interesting seeing how they started getting into the setup of the show. So in chapter 24, we meet up with Elizabeth and Walter, and they're in the pre-production phase of their show. So going through wardrobe, the set, her personality, like that's being portrayed. And Walter is explaining to her the afternoon depression zone, basically that time around like 2 o'clock where you get really tired. Talking about how that is relevant to TV programming, for him at least, and how her audience is primarily going to be housewives, and at this time zone he needs Zot to help wake them up so they can make their big push through dinner to get through the day. So he helps Zot to find some perspective by explaining to her how the show will help those housewives. And I thought that was kind of nice because a lot of times in shows or movies or books, you get someone who's kind of hot-headed and the person in charge is like, just listen to me, just trust me, blah, 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 blah. And here he actually takes the time to try and explain it in a way that she understands.
Yeah, I mean, basically, please trust the decades of experience that I have.
Yeah, but he also explains like, look, here's why.
Yeah.
here's why this is important, which I think is something that Elizabeth needs. She needs to understand the purpose of doing something a certain way.
Yeah, she does.
So I thought that was good. And it, showed some respect for how her brain kind of works. And it shows his competence in that he was able to explain the purpose,
Right. And it kind of, that's like the first foundational layer of their friendship developing, I think, right? Like, I mean, like, I think it had been developing through pre-production, right?
Yeah.
But like that moment where like he kind of has to just explain things flat out for her.
Yeah. Well, it's not like she's your typical talent, right? She didn't set
No.
out to be TV talent.
Correct. Which oftentimes that's sometimes the best talent. Usually whenever they come from a different domain of experience and then they transition into being a TV talent.
This is really the chapter about Elizabeth. I would say Elizabeth and Walter's friendship. So they have some frank discussions about biology and sex drive, and they really kind of become friends having these frank conversations. We also learn that Walter isn't Amanda's biological father, but he loves her all the same and decides that it really doesn't matter.
Right. And that brings up one of our talking points here. So that really does seem like a theme, right? Because Elizabeth didn't really put much stock in her family based on her upbringing. Calvin the same way. And it was more about who you choose than who was like biologically related to you.
Mm-hmm.
So
they definitely both had some rough upbringings.
Right. And I think that's clearly a recurring theme.
Yeah.
That I think.
And possibly part of why Elizabeth did not want children.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a definitely a main theme that Bonnie Garmus brings up a whole lot, is just that your family is who you choose, not necessarily just who you're born with.
Right.
So, and then moving on from that, Elizabeth does end up broadcasting her first pilot. From Walter's perspective, it's a train wreck.
Poor Walter.
She doesn't read the cue cards, and she basically kind of goes rogue. But it's live, so Walter can't just like cut it.
Right. He can't just stop
cut her,
anything.
right? Like it's not like it's pre-recorded. So, but at the end of the day, even though she goes against all of Walter's expectations and what Walter perceives as the worst possible way, at the end of the day, the station does immediately start receiving calls about Elizabeth's shopping list because she listed all the ingredients in chemistry terms. So all these housewives are calling.
Yeah.
They're like, what's sodium chloride? And it's salt. But Walter mentally notes that
the one is vinegar.
Yeah.
And they're like, what?
Yeah. And then
it's vinegar.
And then Walter mentally notes that the clown show, which filled the spot that Elizabeth show now fills, never got any calls.
Right.
So there's immediate interest that Walter can immediately tangibly notice.
Right.
Yeah, which is a pretty big imprint. What we discussed it a little bit, but what are your thoughts on kind of like, I mean, Walter has these decades of experience, and he, put it in sit in his chair, right?
Yeah.
Do you think he was right to try and shoehorn Elizabeth in like a certain direction?
I mean, you would be better able to tell than me, but I would think that typically that's kind of done with talent. Right? You have certain expectations.
It is. Well,
and most talent probably comes in knowing the drill.
Right. Well, that's also why you do a again, I think the station's local, and I don't know all the history.
It was a local station.
But like usually what you do
for new people,
yeah.
In case we haven't mentioned it, Josh is like a producer and does corporate videos and stuff and has some experience in local TV and whatnot. So he does have some video production background.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, people know the general process is that generally you make a pilot, and then the director, executive producer, usually the station manager, which is basically equivalent to like a vice president, usually, at least in this day and age, they'll look at the pilot recording right before it ever airs and kind of make a determination, and they also know, at least in this day and age, looking at ratings, Nielsen and otherwise, generally what may garner interest.
Okay.
Right. So this seems like, and it doesn't help, and we'll get into it a bit later, that Phil Lambent or whatever, the executive producer, clearly doesn't share any of the notable data points and analytics with Walter.
Right.
So Walter just has to basically take Phil's communication on faith.
Well,
that he's not holding out,
doesn't seem
and that still does happen. Like they'll share certain data points with you. Like they'll share certain
only the
metrics.
ones they want to.
Correct, but they won't share
And what supports what they desire.
Right. Like at the station that I worked at, we were able to say we were number one in nightly news. We were not. We were number one in certain demographics. Right. So that's not a full blown lie. Right. So, but that's like that's like a very broad example. From an employee standpoint, they will only communicate certain metrics that they want you to know about.
Yeah.
Like they, not to get too much into a sidebar here, but I think local TV stations in general hate the democratization of analytics because information is power, and they really don't like it. But
it kind of makes it a little more difficult for them.
It does. It's a double-edged sword. It's beneficial, and it's also not, right?
Yeah.
Like depending on the situation. So circling back around, sorry for the sidebar there, everyone, but circling back to the whole, was Walter right in trying to shoehorn Elizabeth into a particular direction? I think, given the information Walter had, yes. I think he was 100% correct in trying to do that.
I think most people in Walter's position, right, where your boss is telling you
you need to do X, Y, and Z.
This, and Walter's job is to
make sure that
get
happens.
the talent to do those things. Like, yeah, I think anyone in that position would at least try, at least at first, right? Like, let's get, like, even being able to be like, let's do what they want, let's play nice, let's get this established, and then we can try and go from there. Then we can take some chances or try some new things down the road,
right?
And kind of looking at it long term. And I don't think Elizabeth understood that part, or that potentiality.
Yeah, Elizabeth is very uncompromising, and that's that's easy to admire.
Yeah, but it's got to be a struggle to try and wrangle.
Yeah, like it's easy to admire, but that usually, I mean, she's a fictional character. It does not usually work out that way if you try to stand on principle. So
I was going to ask you, like, as a producer with experience, what is the most frustrating talent interaction you've had, and what's been the best interaction?
I'm not going to name names.
No, of course not.
Yeah. We'll start with the best. The best was when I met Shaquille O'Neal. That was pretty cool. That's a pretty funny story. Basically, I'm working, and there's a whole bunch of people in this giant reception, basically, and Shaquille O'Neal is mingling. And Shaq sees me all the way across the room.
And Josh is 7 feet tall.
And I'm 7 feet tall. Shaq is like
7'1", 7'2".
I mean, he has to be 7'3", 7'4". He may spoof the height a little bit, but he's tall and he's big. Like, he's tall to me, and I'm 7 foot. So, he is absolutely gigantic. But he comes over, and he just shakes my hand, and he goes, "How's it going, big man?" And then he proceeds to talk to me, and I'm trying to work, but you don't want to be dismissive of Shaq. I mean, I grew up watching Shaq.
Yeah.
So, it was just a pretty cool interaction to like kind of meet with them. It was more like a little bit of a starstruck, right? But like most well-known personalities, media and otherwise, that I interact with through my job, it's very much I'm there to work.
Right.
I'm there to get things done. So I view them as very well compensated professionals. Is kind of how I view most of them.
Yeah.
Which makes it even more frustrating when they can present more of a headache than they really should, given what they're being compensated. So that's all I'll say.
Okay.
I don't want to dive into it too far.
Yeah. And then I was also going to ask how much input would local talent or would talent have on a local TV production? Because I feel like Elizabeth kind of like just railroads her way through a lot of the production stuff. Like if
Right.
it doesn't work for her, she just
Right. So
makes things.
they live in
change.
Commons, California. I don't know what the size of that market would be. And keep in mind, this is a completely different decade.
Right. Right.
However, what I know about that decade, and since that was the golden age of TV,
Mhm.
I suspect there is absolutely no way that she would have that much latitude
Yeah.
right off the bat. And just to bulldog her way through certain decisions, that would just not fly. They would stop that immediately.
Mhm.
Because if she does that, then you're going to have other talent wanting to do that.
Right.
Right. There's multiple shows. There's like, you're trying to keep that train running, right?
Yeah.
But like the whole, her tossing that soup can away,
Yeah.
absolutely not. There was no point. There was no benefit to her doing that whatsoever. She could have
Yeah.
just easily said, we don't use processed ingredients, but she put the label out there.
Yeah.
Like that.
And put it on blast.
Yeah, that actually kind of, I was like, that's just a power trip, honestly.
Yeah.
Like that's completely uncalled for to that brand, to that company that she basically insulted. So yeah, like they should sue.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's, that is not okay. But anyway, sorry, did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, you did.
Once I get rolling, I sometimes just can't stop.
Would local talent have that much authority? No.
No,
They would not.
No.
Which I didn't think they would, but
there-
I just wanted to get your input on it specifically.
there are certainly exceptions.
Because I think you've
but
got
the
like
rule
some
is no.
experience that brings an interesting perspective to this for us that don't have that perspective,
Right.
you know?
Right.
So.
Anyway, moving on. So that's Elizabeth. She kind of does her first pilot, and moving on
It's
from
a
there.
train wreck.
It's a train wreck from Walter's perspective, but Walter decides, okay, I think I can fix this. How about I do a live show?
So Elizabeth does have her first live show. She's not thrilled with the set dressing. It's like a cutesy traditional kitchen with tons of knickknacks all over. And she's like, I've got no room to work. This isn't cool. And Walter faints from the stress after Elizabeth basically gives away all of those knickknacks. At one point, she even invites the live studio audience to come up and take whatever knickknacks they want. So Walter is under a lot of stress. He's being yelled at by his boss. He's got Elizabeth just going rogue and doing her own thing.
Poor guy.
Poor guy.
He's like the bulwark between Elizabeth and the executive producer. And she doesn't quite.
And we also
She
find
doesn't
out that
recognize
he is kind of protective, I would say, of his... I don't remember if it's here or in a later chapter, but he's kind of protective of his female employees. He will not let them meet with... Is it Phil?
I think
the
his name is
studio
Phil
guy?
or Paul. I don't know.
He will not let the women meet with him on their own.
Right.
Because this guy is kind of a jerk.
Yes, and not
And
a good way.
potentially abusive.
Yeah, I mean, he's, you can say it. He's basically a Harvey Weinstein type figure.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, he uses his position to do things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But anyway, moving on.
So Elizabeth sends him home with the casserole that she just prepared from the show. It's like a spinach casserole, and she leaves some directions. And his daughter, Amanda, the one who'd been taking Mad's lunches at school, doesn't like spinach, but she declares that this casserole is the best thing that she has ever eaten.
Which is pretty big to have effectively a
is.
5-year-old
Yeah.
declare that spinach casserole is delicious.
Yeah.
That's intense.
Yeah.
And then we kind of take a break from Elizabeth and her show. Safe to assume that during this kind of breakaway, we kind of go to Mad, her daughter. And during this time, I assume this kind of break from Elizabeth, her show is developing and growing, et cetera, et cetera.
Right,
And she's
continuing.
growing her audience. But we kind of go to Madeline. And she's been instructed by her teacher, and I forget her teacher's name, but her teacher is just a real piece of work. She's been instructed to have Matt has been instructed to have her mother, Elizabeth, fill out a family tree. Well, as we mentioned previously, there's not much of a family that Elizabeth would even care to fill out there, either on her side or on her daughter's father's side, her love, Calvin, right? Like they both did not really have strong family ties or connections. They can only go back like maybe a generation, and that'll be it.
Right.
And it's also, I think even Harriet calls it out that basically she's just wanting effectively gossip on like the local families, basically.
Oh, yeah, on the families of her students.
Yeah, and Elizabeth and Mad for the 1960s live in a very non-traditional household because Elizabeth had Mad out of wedlock.
Mm-hmm.
She's a single mother raising her by herself.
Right.
The only thing that really kind of completes their house is Harriet. And 630, of course, they would consider 630 a part of the family, but 630 is a dog, so it's not going to. It would become gossip, and that kind of takes me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I think Walter is under the same stress with his daughter Amanda. It's just the two of them. And part of the issue is for this assignment, the teacher wants them to bring in a full family photo of like their immediate current family. But like Mad's dad is dead, so she can't get a photo with Calvin.
Right.
So she's upset about that. 630 goes and finds the only family, like full family photo that they have, which isn't even really, like, it's a photo from a news clipping from his funeral. And so it's because Elizabeth was pregnant with Mad, 630's next to her, and they're in front of the casket with Calvin in it. And that's it. That's the only photo that they have.
It's a very heartbreaking reality that
it is.
That you kind of realize.
And then the teacher gets mad about it.
Yeah, for real. Just like I said, piece of work.
Yeah.
So, but that kind of brings us around, to the talking point here, or the discussion point here, which is, how the socially acceptable family has morphed since the 60s. So do you think, like, would anything about Mad and Elizabeth's situation be out of the ordinary today in the early 2020s?
No.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
No, I mean, my parents divorced young, or when I was young. I mean, I guess they were young too, but when I was young, and so we primarily grew up with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know. The only thing that I guess stood out was there was a time where we lived with my grandparents, and I don't know, maybe that's different. I enjoyed it because I liked them.
Right.
So
right.
For us, it was fun. And they had a great big backyard, and it was so fun to play out there with my siblings and stuff. So,
yeah,
I mean, a single mom with one child. No, I mean, and the thing is, like, she was in a committed relationship.
Mm-hmm.
For all intents and purposes, they were practically engaged. Like,
right.
They were emotionally committed. Like, they were emotionally
they were
married,
invested.
I guess, right?
Yeah.
Like, it was that level of commitment, even without legal documents.
Right.
There was that commitment. So,
right.
Okay. No, I don't think it'd be out of the ordinary today. I
agree. Yeah.
I think that happens all the time today.
I agree.
Yeah.
For better or worse. Yeah. It happens more often. So, moving forward in chapter 28, it looks like Madeline attempts to find the orphanage where Calvin grew up in an effort to try and complete this family tree.
Right.
Also, she just clearly wants to know more about her dad. Like,
yeah.
That's the real driving force behind it.
Well, and Elizabeth has not shared everything with her, understandably so.
Yeah, because she's 4.
You're right.
Like,
pretending to be 5 so that she can go to school. But she is 4.
Yeah, and then so
but there's also a limit to what Elizabeth even knows about Calvin and his family and his background.
Right, and she's even said that to Mad.
Yeah.
She's just,
like, I don't think at this point she even knows that Calvin was adopted.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, she knows he was at an orphanage. So
she knows he was at an orphanage, but that was after his parents, whom we find out to be his adopted parents, had passed away in a car crash.
Right.
And then his aunt passed away as well.
Right.
And then he ends up in the orphanage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I didn't quite realize that.
Yeah, it's like his first, I
Oh.
don't know, 5-6 years of life.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Okay. Well,
Yeah, and then we find out that his dad, his biological dad, becomes a patron of the orphanage. And that's how the orphanage gets all of the textbooks
I
and
see.
the sports equipment, because those were important to his father, to his allegedly biological father.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, Madeline's making an effort to find the orphanage. She goes to the local library, which I thought the line from the librarian, the Reverend, whenever we first see him, or whatever, I forget the exchange, but he basically mentions something about, well, maybe like the child needs to go do this, and then the librarian's like, not this child.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just because Matt is exhaustingly inquisitive, just like Elizabeth. So
Yeah. Only in the form of a 4-year-old.
yeah, but
And
that
clearly the library is a frequently
place,
visited resource.
if the librarian knows you, yes,
Yeah.
it obviously is.
Yeah.
But anyway, so that Reverend that I just mentioned, actually was Calvin's former pen pal, Reverend Wakely.
Yeah, I thought that was a nice revisit.
It was. And this is unbeknownst to Mad, because obviously she wasn't alive. She has no idea.
Right.
But Wakely realizes it, so he offers to call the orphanage for her, and he says, I'm not just an adult, number one, but I'm also basically a reverend, so it could be like a religious,
inquiry or something
basically.
like that.
And it's also a long distance call, so he basically tells Mad that he will
Call on her behalf.
and try and communicate what he finds out, because he was a pen pal with Calvin, and he actually was quite fond of Calvin, only through letters, actually. So it was a pretty cool callback.
Met like once in person, or not, they didn't meet. Wakely saw Calvin speak on a panel.
Correct.
When he was attending Harvard, and then after that wrote Calvin a letter, and then that's kind of how their pen pal friendship began.
Right.
But yeah, and part of Mad agreeing to have him make that phone call is because she's trying to not involve Elizabeth. Even Harriet was like, yeah, don't tell your mom about this family tree assignment. We can just fill it in with random names, which Mad does.
Yeah, but it doesn't work out well.
But I don't think it was.
Doesn't she say like Amelia Earhart's her grandma or something like that?
Nefertiti, like she throws out all these famous women, which is very, it's great, because Harriet's like, just put some random names, and I'm sure she was just thinking, just random names, right? Like, just go to the phone book and pick some random names to put in there. But she actually goes with historical figures, and it just has the argument, right, that like all humanity is related.
Yeah, it's like her fallback argument.
Yeah.
Humans are animals. All humans are related. And it's just like.
And I thought it was so cute when the Reverend made some comment about like humans being animals, and
yeah, she's like, thank you.
Mad was like, that's exactly what I've been saying.
Yeah.
And she's been getting in trouble. Like, the teacher has not liked that Mad said that humans are animals.
It's because Mad, she's exhaustively inquisitive, right? Like,
she is, but she's also got like that scientific mind, right?
She does.
And technically, like, yes, humans are animals. They are mammals. Like, that's how it goes.
Yeah, she's the kid who always asks why.
Yeah.
After you give answers, and you're just like, oh my gosh, because all you have to do is ask why 5 times to get someone like I don't know. Right, because we operate on like some on foundational assumptions. Everybody does. So that was a good scene. I also do like how Harriet, a few times, and it's always with Mad, that it will say Harriet exhaled or something like that, and you just know Harriet's going, oh,
yeah,
like she's just like, oh, child.
Yeah.
Basically.
Yeah.
Let's see here. Yeah, you wanna
Matt is
talk about the
clearly
next part?
very sharp and has a lot of energy and a lot of questions.
She does.
So
She
I think
does.
it's understandable
It's
that Harriet would be like, oof,
yeah. I mean, it's like a 4-year-old. That's just
a brilliant 4-year-old.
yeah. It's just a prodigy just coming at you.
Yeah. So then we jump back to Elizabeth. Her contract gets renewed for another 6 months, which apparently took some convincing. Walter has a panic attack. Zot's making a pot pie. And this is where she has the can of soup that she throws out because she's like, no, we're not gonna.
Yeah, and that causes the panic attack.
Yeah,
like, oh my God.
yeah, because Walter's like, look, we need to prove that we can get sponsors, blah, 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 blah. Because as far as he's concerned, as far as what he's been told, is that the show is struggling, even though there's
right, or it's been implied to him heavily. That it's on the chopping block, which in reality, nowhere near the chopping block.
right.
Nowhere
Right.
near. Like if
At
anything,
least
it's
not
being
if
held
you've got
back.
an intelligent studio manager.
Yeah, like it's
You would not. No.
yeah.
So she takes a question from the audience and delivers her iconic line, "Boys, set the table. Your mother needs a moment to herself." So we find out that not only has it been renewed, but she's receiving a slew of letters, people asking questions, comments, thanking her for the show, learning things. I thought that scene was interesting too, because the question from the audience was basically from this woman who, in an ideal world, she had wanted to become a heart surgeon.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got several boys, and so she's always having to like she does the stitches herself, right? Like she patches them up herself.
Yeah, no, it's a very heartwarming moment.
It is, and that's where you see like Elizabeth being very encouraging.
Yeah.
Of like, of course you could do that.
Yeah.
All it takes is these steps.
Yeah, because logically, there's no reason why you couldn't.
Right.
Yeah, she kind of blueprints out her next effectively like 10 years to like, you want to be a heart surgeon, this is what you got to do.
Yeah, go to the library, take the MCATs.
Yeah, so study up, take the initial MCATs test, and then go into a formal education system, basically.
Yeah.
Which, when it's broken down like that, you're like, oh yeah, that is all she has to do. And it's, but
when you're in the weeds of the day to day,
yeah, I mean,
it can be really hard to.
I mean, she was clearly a good mom, right? I mean, she was putting her boys first. In that day and age, it was expected to put your husband first.
Yeah. And then the kids.
And and then the kids, right? And there's also just a lot of just social and cultural barriers that impact, your own personal mental logic. Like, can I do this? Can I not do this? Right? Like, and all that adds up and kind of weighs down on, like in this instance, women. But it can affect everybody, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Like, what if there is a guy in the audience and he wanted to be a seamstress?
Yeah.
But he couldn't be because his dad was a plumber, and his dad was like, "You're going to be a plumber."
Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
It could easily
So
cut
it's not
both ways.
just societal expectations. There's also those familial expectations as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think, expectations are good. They can also be really bad.
Yeah.
Because they can extinguish fires of passion before they even really get going.
Right.
So, which is, unfortunate. So, the next thing, let's see here. Oh, here's a discussion question. So, with the renewal and letters, with the 6-month renewal that Elizabeth received and the letters that they've been receiving, it's pretty obvious that Elizabeth's show is a hit to some extent. Even though the executive producer is saying otherwise. Do you think her and Walter should have, questioned him at all, or even made an attempt to leverage what they knew was for sure about the show? That yes, it's popular. Yes, there's letters and all that. I mean, go ahead.
I don't think we had a clear idea of what all they knew or didn't know. It sounded like the studio manager was basically continuously giving Walter the impression that it was not a success.
Right.
So,
Constant pressure.
Yeah. So I think when you're under that kind of pressure, and here he's trying to wrangle Elizabeth, who is just going to bulldoze her way through and do what she wants to do, I don't think he was able to take a breath and step back and kind of get a overview of like, wait a second.
Mm-hmm.
You keep telling me this, but we keep getting letters and phone calls and whatnot for this, for her show.
Right.
And they're positive.
And couple that with the fact that Walter wants to make sure everyone else can keep their jobs.
Yeah, and I'm sure they were getting some backlash from like husbands and men who didn't like what she was saying.
Mm-hmm.
I think her audience...
they probably didn't like what their wives were suddenly saying.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because they're not going to watch Elizabeth.
No.
But all of a sudden, they're going to be like, wait a minute.
But her audience was very receptive to it. And if enough men are like, why are you saying that? Where is this coming from? And they find out it's the show,
mm-hmm.
and they get riled up enough, they would address it with the studio, who's going to listen to them.
It's the patriarchy.
Yeah.
It was discussed at the weekly meeting of the patriarchy. Okay. I tease. All right.
Yeah.
I think you're up next.
Oh, so our next chapter, we find out that Harriet is assaulted by her husband, who's a piece of work. And then Elizabeth is not happy with that, is like ready to call the police on him. And Harriet's like, no, they wouldn't do anything. They would just accuse me, blah, blah, blah. So that, and then it comes out, she gets like a piece of paper slid under her dressing room door about all of the pay that all the talent at the station are getting and receiving. And she also finds out that there's like profit sharing, but only for the male talent and executives. So she realizes just how underpaid she's actually being, or just how much she's been being underpaid compared to her
male counterparts.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because she's ticked, she teaches how to use poisonous mushrooms while cooking on her show.
Which everyone's like, wait, what?
Yeah. And she's like, oh, it's like the deadly nightcaps, I think.
Yeah, she's like, oh, it's so easy. Here.
She's like, here we go. It actually reminded me, there's an episode, if you guys have seen Psych, there's an episode where they use deadly nightcaps to poison. It's like a food critic or something. So that was what it reminded me of. That's what popped into my head. So she teaches this recipe, during which the mushrooms are heavily featured. And she talks about, you can use these poisonous mushrooms, or you can use these ones that are similar and not poisonous. And the executive producer, Phil, calls Elizabeth into his office. And this is where we find out that Walter, her direct producer, the afternoon programming producer, doesn't let the females meet with Phil on their own. And he basically fires Elizabeth. He tells her she's fired, that Walter's fired, that everyone who works on her show is fired. She keeps her cool and is like, oh, really? You're going to fire all of these people who work on not just my show, but all these other shows for the station. So you're going to have zero crew for all of these shows. And then he is determined to, I guess, put her in her place and attempts to sexually assault her. She starts pulling out a chef's knife, which is like 14 inches long, and he faints from a combination, I think, of the shock of seeing her whip out a knife, but also having a heart attack.
Yeah, smoking and drinking will do that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then, basically, a result of all that is Phil is now in the hospital. So Walter takes over as acting executive producer.
Mhm.
This is after Elizabeth shares the documents that Phil was rubbing in her face, like, you can't understand what this even means,
Oh
blah,
yeah,
blah,
he
blah.
had like a file folder that he like waved in her face, like you don't
Yeah.
even understand these.
Yeah.
And it's like the Nielsen ratings. It's
Oh, yeah, it's everything to make informed decisions with.
yeah,
Yeah.
about the show.
So Elizabeth effectively takes those.
Views them while waiting for the ambulance to
Yeah.
arrive.
And then she keeps them, or at least keeps like the top sheet of it, and shares it with Walter. And it basically confirms what Elizabeth knew and Walter probably felt, was that Elizabeth's show is actually a hit. So Walter proceeds to make syndication deals for Zot's show across the country, and he, quote, tries to do what is right. So,
Yeah. After
that's-
Elizabeth basically instructed him. Because
Yeah.
he's freaking out, like, oh my God, we're all fired? What? And Elizabeth's like, no, you don't understand.
we control the
We're
station.
in charge now.
Yeah. Like,
We have the control now.
yeah, like it's, because like, what's the board of that station going to do? Like, remove any semblance of leadership in your top talent?
Right.
No, like they're not going to do that.
Right.
That'd be silly. So,
And we know that Phil, after his heart attack, was instructed to basically be on bed rest for a while and then not work at all for at least a year.
yeah. So
you can't.
they get a
The
pretty long
station's got to
runway
keep
here.
running.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, they get a pretty long runway. So, and then there's a nice kind of
And we find out that Walter, in making these syndication deals, basically doubles what the station was making.
yeah. So there's no way that
Yeah.
well, I don't know, like Phil's on the board. That's the thing. Like there's so much like good old boy clubs are like a real thing, and especially back then for sure. So who knows how this develops into the final bit of reading, but we'll see. But with all that said, Walter kind of realizes, even though he's never said it out loud, that Elizabeth is effectively his best friend.
Yeah.
And that kind of brings up an interesting discussion point that I think everybody has an opinion about. Can and is it possible for men and women to just be friends, purely platonic friends? What do you think?
I think it depends on the situation.
Okay. Riveting stuff.
I know, just what you were hoping for.
Yeah. I don't. If they're of equal age, I would say no. You can be pleasant. You can be acquaintances.
Yeah.
You can be friends in a group, right?
Yeah.
Where there's like a lot of buffers, but I don't think, if you have.
But if you've got a group of friends, if you're hanging out with one person in particular.
If you have someone 25 and the other party 28, attraction can happen, right? And so I just think it's remarkably difficult to do that. And I would advise most people not to. Now, granted, in this case with Walter and Elizabeth, I think they're best friends because they're workmates, right?
Right.
Right.
Right. And I think that's different too, like work buddies versus
Correct.
Like other friendships. Like that's why I say like I think it kind of depends on the situation a little bit.
Yeah.
Like if you're work friends, I don't know. I think part of it too is they bonded over their traumas as well. Like Elizabeth losing Calvin and Walter losing his ex-wife, right? And then finding out just what a piece of work she was.
Right.
So I think they both, and because at the time they're both in untraditional family situations and their daughters are in the same class. So I think they've got like this mutual, not the same, but like they both have had some traumas that they're dealing with, and they're both kind of in the trenches together.
Okay.
But I don't get any like sexual tension between them. It seems very platonic.
But Walter's also a bit of her senior too, I think.
It seems like it.
Yeah. But I mean, back then I think that mattered even less.
Yeah.
Right. So I don't know. I'm just saying in general, I don't think it's
yeah.
I don't think that's necessarily I think they're workmates. I think they're really close workmates, and that's it. Anyway, so the final chapter. Let's see here. Harriet takes Matt out of school by forging Elizabeth's signature. She with the intention of taking Matt to go see Elizabeth live.
And at this point, Mad is in first grade.
I think so.
So it's a new school year, but Mad and Amanda, Walter's daughter, are with the same teacher.
Yes. Which Matt and Amanda are clearly friends in their own way, which is fun to kind of read about passively. But the parking attendant at the station, basically there's a huge line of people trying to get in to be the live audience for Elizabeth's show. The parking attendant effectively tells them, you guys aren't going to get in. There's no way. You might as well turn around. Some happenstance happens, and he recognizes that Matt is actually Elizabeth's daughter.
Asks for his signature.
Yeah.
Which is adorable.
Yeah, because she wants to give him credit, like he's doing a good job.
She wants to let her mom know, which he doesn't know at the time, who Mad's mother is. But Mad wants to tell Elizabeth, like, hey, just so you know, there's this huge line and you need to be aware that, like, the people outside are working really hard. And so she asks for the parking attendant's name and for him to sign her little notebook. And then when he closes it to hand it back to her, that's when he recognizes her last name of Zott.
That's when he realizes that it's Elizabeth's daughter.
Yeah.
So basically they get front row seats in the live audience. Harriet is nervous that Elizabeth will see them because
they wanted to sneak in the back.
Because they wanted to sneak in the back and just kind of watch for fun. Like it was meant to be an experience for Harriet, but more so for Madeline, right? Like it was meant to be an experience that Elizabeth would be none the wiser to.
Yeah.
But being in the front row kind of flies in the face of that. But eventually, Walter notices them and he asks Madeline and Harriet to meet him in his office. And he basically attempts to explain to Mad, which tried to explain things to Mad, is you get a lot of the whys. He tries to explain that basically Elizabeth, Mad's mom, is attempting to shield them both from celebrity. That is her preference. And clearly, if Walter knows of this, it's her strong preference that be the case and remain for as long as possible.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you know, there's kind of like an interesting talk between them about celebrity and stuff, and that'll come up later in like our highlights. But Elizabeth comes out live on air as an atheist as a result of a question from the studio audience, and that's where our reading ends.
Yeah.
Which it's a bit of a cliffhanger. I've got two questions. Was Elizabeth right or foolish to just come out on air as an atheist? And where do you think the book goes from here? Because I feel like, I'll be frank, I feel like we're basically at the end. Like, I mean, like, we are, but like, it's usually not to like the last 10%. Do I feel like, okay, like I feel like Elizabeth climbed her mountain.
Yeah.
And there's some like, you know,
what more is going to be thrown?
Yeah, there's some like wrap up stuff that can happen, but anyway,
yeah.
The first question, you know, do you think was she right or foolish to come out as an atheist?
For that time period, probably foolish.
Yeah.
You know, just because at that point you're a TV personality.
Right. You need to know what you.
You don't want to alienate your audience.
Right, and at that time, it would absolutely.
Yeah, and if you don't feel like religion matters, which is fine, just don't go there.
Right.
Like there's not necessarily any. I think the audience question was like, is there a particular grace or a prayer that you say before dinner?
This really seems like a self-inflicted wound. This is one of those few instances where Elizabeth just did not think it through.
Yeah.
At all. Like, I think she just responded to a question.
Yeah, she did.
Yeah.
And I thought she handled it, like, fairly well.
Initially, yeah.
But
and then she goes a step further, and you're like,
why?
Shut your mouth. You're like, why would you say that? And I think this is going to be, you know, kind of going into the final stretch here. I think this is going to be, everything's going well, and then this is going to be kind of like the final, you know, like bad guys close in kind of feel, right? I wouldn't be shocked
Yeah.
if the board or the TV station comes after her or sponsorships. You know what I mean? Like I could see this being the small pebble that starts an avalanche that she has to fix before we wrap up the book.
Right, right. I mean, especially, I think it's important to keep in mind the time period of the 50s, right?
Mhm.
Like,
Yeah.
if this were something done now, some people would care, a lot of people wouldn't care. Like, think what you think.
Right.
But at the time, it probably was a bigger deal.
Right.
And I think it is going to be a more, like, that's the thing. Like, for being so intelligent, like, having a lot of book smarts,
Mm-hmm.
it's also not logical to give there are these producers and higher ups who are basically waiting for an excuse to fire you.
Correct.
And so it seems like there are some situations where she could be a little more strategic.
Well, the other thing too is like now that they know that this chemistry kind of stick it to it format is a hit, they will go out. They will find another piece of talent that is more agreeable,
Yeah.
but still gives just enough of the impression that it's
Right.
their show.
I mean, not
Right.
only that, they might decide.
They'll 100% do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, I mean, anyway, let us know what you think. That was our reading for part 3 of 4 and our discussion. I think we had a lot to talk about there. We would love to hear your thoughts and comments about what we discussed and about things that we didn't discuss because, frankly, there's a lot going on in this book and in all books that you just kind of can't 100% get to between two people. Otherwise, we'd be here for 4 hours. So,
Yeah.
leave your thoughts and comments down below. Like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell. But before we wrap up, let's do our favorite highlights.
I believe in you, Elizabeth Zott, and I believe in your mission of food that matters, but that's not just making dinner. Understand this. You must make it look at least a little fun. If I wanted you to put viewers to sleep, I would have slotted you and your hot pads in at 2:30. Elizabeth thought for a moment. I guess I hadn't really thought of it that way. It's TV science, Walter said. Hardly anyone knows about it.
That's a good exchange.
Yeah.
The next one is, it's about the shopping list. Some confusion about tomorrow's ingredients, specifically CH3COOH. Acetic acid, Elizabeth supplied. Vinegar, it's 4% acetic acid. I'm sorry. I probably should have written the list in layman's terms. You think? Walter said.
God is why they were still married and why their marriage was her burden to bear, because it was given to her by God. God was big on burdens, and he made sure everyone got one.
I'm not sure whose inner monologue that was. If that was
Harriet.
That was Harriet.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That one kind of jumped out to me. God's big on burdens. Yeah, he is. Let's see here. Some people think you can't miss what you never had, but I think you can. Do you? That is Madeline talking to the Reverend, which is very insightful for a 4-year-old.
Yeah. Boys, set the table, Elizabeth commanded. Your mother needs a moment to herself.
It's a good line. And then this one is pretty good. Were most men like Phil? In Walter's opinion, no. But did most men do anything about men like Phil, himself included? No.
But why is saying what you think so rare? Because there are consequences, Harriet said. Huge consequences. Walter agreed.
And that's right before Elizabeth comes out as an atheist. It's like, what timing.
Yeah.
So those were some of our favorite highlights. Let us know what some of yours were from the reading or from at any point in the book down below in the comments.
So our next episode is going to conclude. Our next episode will conclude our book club for Lessons in Chemistry. So that means we're going to read from chapter 33 through the end of the book.
All right. Remember to like and subscribe. And until next time, that's my wife, Katy.
And that's my husband, Josh.
And this has been
Book Club Date.
Have a good one. We'll see you later.